Welcome to the Nerdy Paradox, the channel where we like to have a cozy chat about some of our favourite topics in the nerdy sphere. Today we're taking a dive into the topics of handhelds and handheld gaming, and how things like game streaming and more powerful PC handhelds have really reshaped the landscape when it comes to how we play our favourite games. Handheld gaming. You see, I'm old, like real old. Like, I'm the oldest member of the Nerdy Paradox. And I don't just mean in the old in the way that I look, which is, grey hairs, which is an absolute pain in the backside to remove with the green screen and chroma keying. But I mean, like, my gaming memories are the oldest across the channel. Say hello to my very first handheld gaming experience. That's right, it's the OG Nintendo Game Boy. And this is still the same console that I got on my 11th birthday all those years ago. And it was a big deal because previously it only really been single games or the horrible Tiger handhelds that you could get to be able to take with you. But now we had swappable carts and the ability to play games on the go when you were going to visit older relatives or being bored on long car journeys. It was great, absolutely ace. There were other excellent alternatives such as the Game Gear and, in my opinion, the criminally underrated Atari Lynx, although that did need an entire shop worth of batteries to work. But anyway, my point is that gaming and handhelds evolved as time went on. You had the follow-ups with the Game Boy Pocket and Game Boy Color, and then of course you had the Game Boy Advance, the innovative Nintendo DS, the PSP, and lots of other devices such as the failed N-Gage that came out. The handheld industry evolved over time, it's fair to say. And a bit like something your racist uncle might say at a wedding, I can honestly say that some of my favourite gaming experiences are games that exist on handheld systems. But I also think it's fair to say that there's been one thing that's been true of handheld consoles through most of their lifetime, and that is often one of compromise. You see, home consoles had the power, they had the technology and the sexiness, whereas by necessity, handhelds were always smaller and often cheaper and things like that to make. They had to deal with the technological limitations of carrying around a console. That means things like battery life, screens and processing power in a small form factor. If we take it from a publisher perspective, there was a pretty big benefit to handheld gaming as well. You see, because handheld gaming traditionally was cheaper to produce. It needed smaller dev teams, it needed smaller scope, and was therefore a lot cheaper to make a game, and certainly a lot quicker to bring things to market. If you think back to the ages of, say, the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS, just how many tie-ins to big AAA games came out that were just tied by name with a smaller, limited scope game with it? There were loads. Then, in the late noughties, things started to go wrong for handheld gaming, and we put it down to two main factors, and the first one is pretty obvious. A lot of the games that were very popular on handhelds were simpler, smaller affairs, particularly in the age of the Game Boy Advance and DS, and now people had smartphones. You could recreate a lot of those playing experiences on a device that you carried around with you at all times. Why do you need a handheld? Secondly, and possibly more importantly for our own money, when it came to dedicated handheld gaming, there was an entirely new factor as hardware became more and more powerful, and that was it was costing publishers more money to make games for handheld consoles. The PS Vita and to a certain extent the 3DS were more complicated machines to develop for. The budgets for those were starting to creep up to become closer to those perhaps of a larger game for a home console. But except for making it for a home console, you were making it for a periphery device, a handheld that might have a smaller install base. So you had two factors going on. You had making dedicated large budget games became more and more expensive, and at the same time the simpler, cheaper games were readily available on mobile. And that was pretty much what seemed to be the death knell for the handheld scene. Until that was the arrival in 2017 of the Nintendo Switch, and that was a game changer because for the first time it gave you comparatively current gen titles on a device that could be played in handheld. Developers no longer needed to create separate titles for you to be able to play on the go, they just needed to, port their titles across. Those ports weren't without their own challenges. The Nintendo Switch, even at launch, had quite limited processing power. It wasn't really a powerhouse of a device. But it was fair to say that many indie and AA developers could quite easily port their systems over, and even quite a lot of AAA content could get onto the system as well. If you look at the Doom and Doom Eternal ports, they are the same basic game that you could get on their home console and PC equivalents. Yes, the graphics are downgraded and perhaps some of the experience isn't as good, but it is still the same full game, and that's pretty amazing. And we can really remember spending a lot of time playing games like Skyrim and The Witcher 3 in bed. That was just amazing and groundbreaking for us at the time. Something else also occurred post Nintendo Switch that mixed things up a little bit, and that was cloud gaming and game streaming. Now, Valve and Sony had tried things like game streaming via the Steam Link or Remote Play app, and there had been cloud gaming platforms before that. But really, you started to see after 2017 and 2018 a real uptake in the idea of cloud gaming as a viable alternative. Now, if you have the internet for it and a compatible device, you can get some really good streaming services such as GeForce Now and Game Pass working, as well as being able to stream your own devices via PlayStation Remote Play or Steam Link or any other devices to connect to like your Xbox, which means that you have access to a lot of your hardware, again, on the go. With the Nintendo Switch making handheld gaming feel fresh and new services come online here in the year of our Lord 2024, which does somewhat date this video for future monetization. But anyway, the point is that it's an entirely new world. You have lots more handheld hardware, and things like the Steam Deck that have come out mean that you have access to PC level hardware that you can play things on the go like you never could before. And that's amazing. This is the future. Well, sort of. Handheld still can't compete with top-of-the-line machines. You are always going to have limitations on things like frame rate, graphical resolution, or the impact of such games on battery life. Your PC handheld may well play the games, but your experience might vary, particularly on latest AAA titles. And when it comes to game streaming, it very much depends on your device and your connection to your internet. You may still get things like disconnects or buffering or lag on your inputs as well, meaning the gaming experience isn't perfect. We'd be lying if we said there still wasn't some compromise to handheld gaming. But for many of us, those compromises don't really matter because, well, it gives us something we didn't have before. Freedom. Just freedom to play. With the ability to run home gaming on some sort of device, the way you interact with games has changed massively. It used to be that handheld gaming was a substitute for your games on your PC or home consoles, but that isn't the case anymore. Let's talk a little bit about my use case when it comes to how we interact with games. You see, in my house there are 4 of us and only one large TV that the consoles are connected to. There's a lot of competition there. We have one gaming PC that's in the side room, but again, there's a lot of competition to use the main PC. Plus, daily life is busy. I have kids, so I spend an enormous amount of time driving around and picking them up and waiting outside various clubs and activities. I have a job and I have to travel for my job occasionally, so I have to spend time away from home. And my wife, for some God knows reason, wants to watch Ginny and Georgia in 4K on Netflix. What am I to do? I have always been able in these situations to reach for a handheld console. This isn't a new concept at all whatsoever, and I have enjoyed doing so, but it has always been a separate game and a separate experience. It's not a continuation, whereas now I can play my game on my home console and PC and pretty much play uninterrupted when I can't get access to it. That's great. My real epiphany moment with handheld gaming came slightly after the launch of Elden Ring when I was totally obsessed with that game. I had been playing my PC and it was all I could think about all the time was getting back to it. I was just utterly engrossed. But then came the terrible news that my work was sending me away for a few days to a place that had limited access and I would be away from my beloved gaming PC. And I suppose my family and stuff. But the Steam Deck had launched. I loaded it up on there. I synced my saves and in the evenings, my obsession was satiated. I could carry on my journey, and as a tarnished, I still died loads regardless. But the point is, I didn't miss out on any play, and that was so game-changing for me. Truth be told with this video, it's either going to be for you or not for you. If it's for you, you've probably already got a device or are interested in it because your use case fits it. Or you might be one of those incredibly lucky people that I envy massively who just doesn't need to play handheld because they always have access to their PC or anything. But if you are people that are interested in playing handheld, we wanted to give you an idea of just how much devices have changed us and the 3 devices we've been using the most over the last year or so to play our games. Firstly, we are going to give honourable mention to the Nintendo Switch, which doesn't make our list of the top 3. That's not to say we don't love the device and we don't play it really regularly, but we have noticed over the last year or two, we tend to play it more now for Nintendo exclusives because a lot of the other games work on other handhelds. So we're not leaving this out for any anti-Nintendo bias or anything like that. It's just we tend to play the Switch for particular games now, and this is more about general gaming and handhelds and stuff as well. But let us not say we still love you, Switch. Also, can we get the Switch 2 soon, Nintendo? Because, I'd like to play some more on it. First and foremost, we have the big daddy of handheld gaming. That's right, the Steam Deck, the real device that came out and changed everything. And this has been our main go-to device over the last couple of years. It really is quite an extraordinary piece of kit and possibly one of the most ergonomic pieces of kit that we've ever owned. If you have a Steam library of games or want to get into PC gaming, you really can't do better when it comes to pricing as well than the Steam Deck. It's the most console-like experience of all the handhelds out there at the moment, and you can play the majority of your Steam library really easy straight out of the box with very little modifications or playing around. Most of the default settings will work if the game's supported. There are some limitations to the Steam Deck. Third-party launchers won't work out of the box. Some games won't work very well or at all, particularly some major popular titles. And you may have to configure things like through third-party apps to get some of those launchers or emulation to work. But if you encounter the new OLED model, which is pretty darn sexy, you've got a really compelling device for not too much more than Nintendo Switch, and would be something that we'd recommend you get hold of. The next is a viable, albeit pricey and slightly more complicated machine, and that is the Asus ROG Ally, which is probably the first major competitor to the Steam Deck to come out of the gates from a major manufacturer. It's nice, isn't it? There were other PC handhelds that were available in the market as well as the Steam Deck, but they tended to be from small niche Chinese companies such as Ioneo, GPD or 1X, which were very expensive, although had quite good power profiles. The Asus, though, have produced a handheld in the ROG Ally that is trying to compete closely to price-wise with the Steam Deck, but give a little bit more power and oomph. The ROG Ally comes in two models, the Z1 or the Z1 Extreme, and we would really recommend the Z1 Extreme because the internals for that are so much more powerful in comparison to the standard Z1. And the main thing to note is that Asus is a manufacturer and not a platform holder like Steam. Therefore, it doesn't have its own OS. It is a Windows device, and that is both excellent and a downside when it comes to handheld gaming. It's good because everything is designed really in the PC world to work with Windows, so anything you can run on a Windows PC will at least open and boot on the ROG Ally, and you can dock it quite easily and use it as a PC with no compromise, and if you're familiar with Windows, you'll be familiar with this. The ROG Ally is that little bit more powerful than the Steam Decks when it comes to graphics, and it does come with a very nice 1080p LCD screen that runs at 120Hz and also supports FreeSync. And if any of that made no sense to you, then this probably isn't the device for you, because this is closer to a gaming PC in the fact that you need to configure and tinker with it quite a lot to get the games running optimally. Battery life is also pretty bad, particularly if you're running more demanding games to try and get the extra juice out of the Ally. And we should also be quite honest that there have been a fair few build quality complaints from users as well, with components like the micro SD card shorting out for some people due to heat issues. So you have to bear that in mind. But if you are looking for premium PC gaming with no limitations to what you can run, and you don't mind being plugged in and playing around quite a bit, the ROG Ally is a premium device to own. And lastly, on our list of handhelds that we've been using the most, we have quite an outlier on the list with this, the Logitech G Cloud, a streaming dedicated handheld released just over a year or so ago by Logitech. The G Cloud is, as a device, just quite weird in so many ways. It's made by Logitech, which is mostly associated with creating peripherals for gaming, such as streaming equipment, mice, keyboards, and things like that. This is an Android forked handheld that is designed purely for streaming. It comes with a very lovely 7-inch LCD panel that runs at 1080p and an incredibly ergonomic design with very comfortable controls. It feels a lot more like using an Xbox controller than most handhelds, which is great when it comes to comfort. You can stream games from cloud gaming services like Game Pass as well as GeForce Now, but you can also use it to connect remotely to your devices like PC, PlayStation or Xbox using a variety of apps, so you can stream those on your local network comfortably. And to be honest, the chip's not too bad, so you can get some pretty good emulation out of it as well. That said, there's a big downside and probably a reason why this is not a very, very well-known device, and that is the price. At launch, and its RRP is $349, which is fast approaching more expensive handheld territory like a Switch OLED or even a Steam Deck, and you have to factor that in. We have to be honest, we got ours second hand and we got it about $150 cheaper, and at that price, it's been a fantastic little thing to use. but we don't know if we could recommend it at full price. But really, when it comes to game streaming and being able to play things locally, it's been a great experience. And when we wanted to play perhaps on one of our PlayStation 5 games but can't get to the TV, this has been our go-to device to stream in really, really good quality. But just bearing in mind, it probably isn't for everyone. So there we have it. The Nintendo Switch may have started this revolution, but a lot of other manufacturers have stepped up now to help evolve gaming in the handheld sphere. Whether you choose game streaming or a dedicated handheld to play locally, one thing has massively changed in the handheld in our opinion, and that's been what needs to compromise. For us personally, it's managed to change massively how we interact with games. We've actually completed in the last few years more games than we had previously because rather than us having to change our lives to fit in gaming, gaming now fits in with our lives. We'd argue strongly that portability has been the bigger revolution in gaming than it has been with things like GPUs, graphics, or even VR. This affects how we play our games and affects where games sit in our lifestyle. That's such a big change from it being something we had to think about to something we can bring with us. From the Switch to the deck and everywhere in between, this has opened up gaming's possibilities in a bigger way than any GPU leap ever could. In our mind, the best and most innovative gaming technology is the one that changes how you interact with your games. And when it's from the Switch to the deck, we can safely say that handheld gaming over the last few years has changed how we work with the game and where we can fit gaming into our lives. And that's awesome. And that's it for today. If you have any thoughts on handheld gaming and how it's affected you, do drop them in the comments below. We'd love to read them. In the meantime, if you could drop a like and subscribe for all things nerdy here at the Nerdy Paradox, that'd be awesome. And we'll see you on the next video. Catch you later.